Welcome to the High Existence Podcast. This is your host, John Brooks, and today is the first podcast of its kind. This is going to be an ongoing series. I'm super excited to start rolling these out. Me and the other High Existence guys, so that is Eric Brown, who I've interviewed before, and also Mike Slavin, who's also been interviewed and has been on the podcast a few times. From now on, every couple of weeks, we are going to be having a round table discussion about whatever is interesting or going on or relevant in the world or in our lives. When we sat down to talk in today's episode, we obviously had to discuss the situation with coronavirus because that is such a big topic that is going on right now, and it's very important that we get a handle on this and make sense of all of the information and data that's going on. So when you listen to this episode, you will hear us talk a little bit at the beginning about books that we're reading, and then we switch topics and start discussing the current global pandemic. Just a disclaimer, me, Mike, and Eric, we're not medically qualified. We're not experts on immunology and infectious diseases. We are people who are trying to make sense of the current situation, and any of the practices that we are freely expressing that we do, we are not saying that you must do these or that if you do these, you will be completely safe from any kind of disease or health issue. In this episode, what we are trying to focus most on is how we can think about the situation in the most constructive way. I hope that you enjoy these episodes. There are going to be much more like this coming up. We've already recorded our second one. If you do, please leave a review. Please let us know what you think. And without further ado, this is me, Mike, and Eric, the High Existence team, talking in a roundtable about the current coronavirus situation. So, what are you reading?
Yeah, so Jordan introduced me to this book while we were on the latest Apotheosis. It's called Discovery of the Presence of God by David Hawkins. And it's literally just like a blueprint or a step-by-step instruction on what the state of enlightenment is and how to get there. And it sounds even funny to say that, but one of the valuable parts of the books is just how seriously and straightforward and concise he talks about this. He's like, yes, this is possible, this is real, this is what you do to get there. And he has this technique that he's created on how to verify like subjective truth, basically. Calls it like a calibration level. It goes from 0 to 1,000. 1,000 being like enlightened sages like Buddha and Krishna and Christ, and just like ultimate truth. And like there's a paragraph in the introduction where he's just like, you know, the methods and the information covered in this book will lead an individual dedicated to doing the work to the state known as enlightenment or liberation. Like just completely straightforward. And then at the end in brackets, it's like calibrates at 1,000, calibrates as true.
So I've just finished The Pathway of Surrender, or Letting Go by David Hawkins. And it was recommended as the same for you by Jordan. And I found myself, when I was reading it, like, why am I listening to you? You know, you're talking to me about emotions. A lot of the stuff you're saying is, this is my interpretation, either like kind of common sense or just your own opinion on it. And I know a lot of smart people who have opinions on emotions and enlightenment, and I like a lot of what they say. And if you look at like the Buddha's teachings, which are thousands of years old, he's very systematic in his approach. Like he's got like the 4 noble truths and the 8 this and the 10 that and the 5 steps to this. So he's like super systematic. So it's all laid out there. So I was like, why am I meant to take this guy, David Hawkins, is like hierarchy of emotions and energy and vibration seriously when he's saying like fear is this and love is this much, this number. I sort of struggled a little bit with that. So like, what was your experience of that, Eric, when you're reading Hawkins?
So there is essentially a leap of faith that comes in here, which is, so he would actually argue that a lot of what, at least the way the Buddha acted, maybe not the recordings, because again, with a lot of ancient wisdom traditions, it doesn't get written down until decades or centuries later. But at least the being that he would like agree with the way he acted and the things that he said. But the leap of faith here is that he's come up with a system that he calls, I think, the consciousness calibration scale. Literally goes from 0 to 1,000. 0 being like subhuman, like bacterium, and 1,000 being like the enlightened sages and the teachings of like the Vedas and all of that. And he has a whole explanation of the system and how he came to it. And it's actually somewhat of a simple like kinesthetic measurement, where it's done by surveying a bunch of people holding their arm straight out from them. And he basically makes the case that things that are fundamentally subjectively true, like that you can get behind, have this life affirming force behind them and gives you an influx of strength, whereas things that are false and that you can't get behind are like anti-life and weakening you. And so basically, if you stick your arm and you make a declarative statement, you push down on the end, and if you hold it, it calibrates at a level of truth, and if it lowers the rating. And so this all then circles back to the text written in his books, where what he enters, he'll often either beside a sentence or a paragraph or a certain idea that he's putting forth, he will put the calibration level beside it. To give some examples, anything below 200 is like fear and guilt based and shame based. From 2 to 500, it's like the domain of the intellect and like being able to put forward propositional statements. So a lot of people like Freud and Jung literally calibrate at like 499. The leap into 500 is like heart-centered, intuitive knowing, experiential knowing. Something like 600 is like a state of unconditional love, and if you can actually like truly, like from the depth of your being, say that like you love all beings, and that it gets around there. And then anything above that is seriously the domain of like the enlightened sages. And there's a part of me that can get behind that, right? Just as much as I can get behind like science or religion. Like it's like, okay, like he's got a framework, like what if this is true? And then based on what he says, it's like, okay, yeah, I actually get behind that. And I think with a lot of strong like wisdom teachings and wisdom schools, like the truth is simple. Truth is like the thing that can't be simpler. So having things that come across as being straightforward or cliche or very clear is like, yeah, that's probably correct. Because the only reason you need to like get into all the justifications and the rationalities is like when you're either trying to prove it to yourself or like spin it to others. And so to have it come across as incredibly concise and direct is it's really nice, because a lot of this space is shrouded in mystery and woo and beating around the bush and never making the point.
Would you, so is he does muscle testing, that's his like verification of truth?
Yeah, so honestly I'm not adept at this. I don't know the system in depth, but from my understanding it's something around that. And again, he was a practicing psychologist at Harvard for 5 decades. Like, so it's been through the refinements, and it's been through many iterations with people. Right.
So do you think that it's like what is your view on this method of verifying truth? Do you think that it's solid? Like you would be okay using that for like major life decisions or like really important things in your own life?
I would actually be interested in learning the system in more depth to see if it's something you can actually just like DIY at home. That'd be a great metric of testing, because you can ask a bunch of people like, what do you want and how do you feel, and like you can come up with an answer, but like, do you even know if that's how you feel? Like, what about like intimate relationships? It's like, what does love mean to you? Like, do you have unconditional love? It's easy to say that, but like, is that something you can prove or experience subjectively in like an inner knowing? And to have a framework there in a world and in a space that has very little by way of legs to stand on, it's like, yeah, okay, that's a nice direction to move.
One thing that I feel challenged by in the hierarchy or the scale that he has set up is it is absent. It doesn't feel like it takes context into account, because to me, there's actually really reasonable scenarios in which fear, guilt, and shame are actually important responses. I don't think those emotions or those experiences are to be rejected or to be sort of treated as lesser than when they become prevailing and overriding and stripped of their applicability. Then sure, but I think there's a reason that guilt and shame are experienced. There's a reason fear is experienced, and they're like, to experience it isn't to be less enlightened, in my view. So that's one thing that jumps to mind. And it's interesting noticing how, for whatever reason, I would have suspected John to have the response to this book that he has had. I haven't read the book myself, but I know enough about Hawkins and feel the vibe around him. I've known about Hawkins and his scale for like 5 years. But yeah, it's just like interesting the differences, like what are the rooting or prevailing like worldviews that would cause Jordan to be really charged up about letting go, and John to be a little less like, man, I'm not getting much out of this,
Well, just on that point, one thing is that a lot of the ideas in letting go, I really am behind. Like, I really like it, but they're not new to me. I've heard them in other contexts. The idea of letting go itself is not something that is new to me. I sort of, my feeling when I was reading it was like, the honestly, if I'm being as honest as I can, it's like the Buddhist teachings are much better, and this is just sort of like a modern dilution of those. That was my feeling reading it, and the sort of the wisdom and the profundity of the Buddha's teachings, even though they weren't directly from his mouth, they probably came about 100 years later, still strike me as being more and more true the more I learn and the older I get. And it's like, it just baffles me how much insight the Buddha had into the human condition. And yeah, like the whole scale was like, I'm sure Hawkins was incredibly wise and incredibly enlightened as a person. But yeah, it just didn't really connect for me. And there's something that kind of triggers me a little bit about a sort of like hierarchy of emotions. It's like where we start being like, where are you, bro? I'm like 800. Are you like still 600? Whoa, you've got a long way to go, and it's like that kind of thing. Whereas like the Buddha would just be like, Buddha is afraid right now. I see it. Buddha is happy right now. I see it. Nothing is good. Nothing is bad. I see it. It would be about being mindful about whatever emotion comes up, instead of like being like, this one is above that one. So yeah,
there is an important, I think, piece of context here where his whole kind of the bedrock foundation of his work is the state of non-duality. And so he would actually say, like, there's no one there to feel any of the emotions. I don't think it's necessarily putting the emotions on a hierarchy. It's just saying, well, gradually, as this instantiation of God ascends up the thing, you actually just remove emotion as well, and it creates that calm peace that is so reminiscent or archetypal of sages, where they're completely unfuckwithable, right? You can't like perturb them, because again, there's no one there to be bothered by any of this. And like it almost goes back to something like primal animalistic instincts. I guess that would be a better way to say what some of those lower numbers are, where it's like just acting out of primal drives and primal motivations. But yeah, he really just emphasizes this point of like, really all you're doing in ascending or in walking this path is gradually stripping away the layers of essentially deception of mind, until you get to the point where you would recognize that, you know, he even says it in the book, it's like the author and the reader are the same being talking to themselves. Like, so you would resonate with the teachings of the Buddha because you're talking to yourself. It's all just like the million masks of God talking to themselves, feeling like they're separate, but they're actually just the same substance echoing messages back and forth to itself. And that is the whole crux. So it's like, yeah, sure, there are feelings that arise, but there's no individual experiencer of them.
That brings up for me the issue of like certain truths, if they're not received at the right time, are not necessarily useful. Mm-hmm. So I would imagine most people reading that book aren't people who have like sort of dissolved the self and read from an egotistical sort of perspective. Is that book even useful? You know, I know that in certain Buddhist schools they don't teach like the no self thing until you have like a lot of practice with concentration first, because otherwise you're just going to be thinking there's no one there. Like, yeah, I can't, I'm thinking right now that I don't have a self. Wow, I'm looking for it, it's not there. Wow, yeah, I'm enlightened. I feel really happy right now. Enlightened people are happy. Yeah. Oh, wow, I don't have thoughts. Yeah. Oh, it's quiet. Yeah, I don't have a thought. And it's like, you just go on this, like Sam Harris talks about this a lot, how you can think your way into kind of like a deluded enlightenment. So, yeah, there's that also to consider. Is it the right, for a mass audience, is it the right kind of message?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, and if a sage was stabbed, he would still scream. I don't think fear ever becomes eradicated.
That's a good quote.
You know?
So we're talking about this hierarchy of consciousness, and Hawkins did talk a lot about fear, and there's a lot of fear going on right now in the world, if you've looked at the news. So yeah, what's going on with you guys? Like, where are you and what's going on?
I'm in Boulder, Colorado. In this county, there are no confirmed cases of coronavirus. That doesn't mean there aren't cases. It's very likely that it's here. It's interesting. There's different parts of me. There's like an intellectual exploration that I'm doing to try and get a real grasp and assessment on what is the nature of this situation. And then there's another part that is emotional and learning to calibrate how to like sense and respond to this. And so, from what I can tell, the piece that is, and you know, my expertise in this conversation being that I'm a human being who is somehow a participant in this crisis, not a medical doctor or anything of that nature, just like a normal person who's trying to make sense of it all. And so the idea that has really helped me understand, to the best of my ability, what to do in this scenario is reducing connectivity in the system. You see people sharing about like flatten the curve. That seems really important because the unnecessary fatalities will happen if the medical system becomes overwhelmed, where there aren't enough beds, there aren't enough respirators, people can't be taken care of, and And so slowing the spread is kind of the aim, so that we can attend to the pieces, as they show up. Now the emotional side of it feels like, okay, everyone, don't panic, don't freak out, don't start projecting all of your fear onto the world. All of the toilet paper purchasing is really confusing to me. It seems like there are much more valuable things that could be purchased, and it doesn't seem like toilet paper shortages are really. It's just strange. I don't really get it, and I think that's some sort of, it's like a mimetic attractor. There's this guy Rene Girard who talks about mimesis and how we copy the behaviors of other human beings. So we see that we go to the store and see how toilet paper has been sold out, and so everyone wants to go and buy, and like everyone is looking for it. I haven't heard a real solid explanation as to why everyone, keeps buying it that isn't just that.
I have an explanation for it.
Yeah, hit us with it, John.
So if you think about like the two main fears, it's like obviously like death is one of them, and another one is social humiliation. Okay, so if people are going to die, I think they want to die with some dignity. I think that's where it's coming from. Like if people are going to get sick, they don't want to be like smelling and feeling like off. And I mean, think about the worst fear ever. It's not just dying, it's dying in a state of filth with everyone looking at you and laughing. Like that's even worse than just dying as a hero, right? So it's like, I think that is connected to this feeling of like, if I can't take care of my basic hygiene, like what does that make me in the group? Because think about it, like imagine if you couldn't shower or stay clean. That would probably be on a par with food for some people, because of the whole like social standing side of it. What do you think?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, well, the first thing that comes to mind is, well, why are you giving up already? Like, why are you going to die in a state of filth? So at least I have my toilet paper. Like, I feel like, put the attention on some of the more essentials, but I don't know.
I agree. I haven't stocked up on toilet paper.
You're vulnerable. I'll just be one-sheeting it for a little while, just being really mindful of my use.
One thing that's interesting, I'm seeing a lot on social media at the moment, is there are like three groups of people. There are like the people that are saying it's all overblown by the media, it's just a flu, everything's fine. You have the people that are like, don't you realize what's going on right now? Like, this is a pandemic and billions of people are going to die. And they're like the ones buying a lot of toilet paper. And then you have like the third group of individuals like, why are we either panicking or ignoring it? We should just be prepared and be reasonable. And I've been thinking about this, and I've noticed in myself that I have this oscillation between extreme panic, like my chest is tight, I'm gonna die, have I got coronavirus, and actually it's just the flu, everything's fine. Like I'm oscillating, and I think that there's some sort of like for fear, it's not really like a gradual process. Like you're either afraid or you're not. And I find myself switching either between like a state of fear or like, oh, everything's going to be fine. I don't really have like a 3 out of 10 fear, or like a 4 out of 10 or a 5 out of 10. It's usually like a 2 or an 8. And I've been reflecting that might be some sort of survival instinct, because the whole point of fear is that it kicks you into action. When you're afraid of something, you act. Otherwise, I mean, what is it? Just sort of like a general low hum of anxiety that kind of keeps you frozen. I mean, that's not really that useful evolutionarily. How have your guys' emotion been sort of on this, between like fear and not being afraid?
Well, the thing that I'm hearing in what you're saying, those groups, I like that as a way of sort of drawing some lines around the tectonic plates of what we're seeing online, because so many people are getting their information from these different interactions. And I see the one group in denial, And basically, it's somewhat of a boy who cried wolf situation with the media. There have been so many instances of scare cases of superbugs, H1N1, swine flu, like all of these things that turned out like where the news media was using the fear to make like basically jack into our attention. And now we have a situation where this is actually going to disrupt our lives to some degree. We're already seeing the disruption, even if just looking at cancellation of large events. People see that and think, oh, everyone's just panicking. So from where they're seeing it as panic, not just risk mitigation. And they're just in denial of the fact that we're actually in a scenario that is somewhat serious. And then on the other side, there are people who are catastrophizing. They think it's the end of the world, it's all burning down, and they're freaking out at the people who think that they're in denial, because they're the kind of people that are going to contribute to killing everybody because they're going to be around spreading it and all of this stuff. And then you have the people in the middle who are just being vigilant and not losing their shit. And it's just like trying to take necessary precautions and remaining grounded. And I think a key part in how people are relating to it is, one, your own relationship to your mortality, your own relationship to taking responsibility in the world, and your ability to regulate your own emotions and take responsibility for them just the same. So there's all of this stuff that we're seeing. And everyone wants to, pick a bad guy. So that group over there, and it's really quickly become politicized here in the States, where it's now like we're seeing almost like down the party line. We're seeing it because it could be used as a weapon against the team that you're playing for, which I find absurd. It's like, guys, can we put down politics for just a minute and deal with this on a united front? So that's kind of the piece that I'm seeing. And I don't have, if I have fear, I'm trying to let that, like you said, John, it's taking me into action. It's causing me to like, okay, what do I really need to do here? Helping me kind of better understand, research, call some people, see what their feeling is. I talked to a friend who works as he's like going to be a physician's assistant soon, but he's in the hospital system, and they aren't getting slammed with it, but they can feel the wave coming, and just kind of getting a sense of like what's going on there, like more on the ground. And so, but I think I feel the most difficulty when I'm not sure what I should be doing to help stave off any kind of oncoming difficulty, where if I acted now, I would save myself some suffering. And I think that's where a lot of people are stuck, is our relationship to uncertainty is such that we really struggle with it. And this is causing a massive change, a massive spike in uncertainty in people's lives. And most people don't know how to handle uncertainty. They really try to stabilize their life. So I'll stop talking for a bit, but that's kind of my general painting on the canvas at this point in time.
Yeah, you brought up, I think for me, one of the most important points here, which is, this is basically holding up a huge mirror to everyone individually and us as a collective, and seeing like, okay, when something pushes against you, how strong is your foundation? And I think we're seeing, at least some of us are seeing that, maybe my foundation wasn't as strong as I thought. It's easy to think that you're strong and capable when you haven't had a force push against you. It's like, oh yeah, well, I'm still standing. But then when something comes along and actually pushes you heavily, like, what are you going to do? And you see it. You see this, it's kind of reminiscent of the black and white thinking we find ourselves in a lot. Things are either amazing or they're terrible. Things are never just like okay or serious. And so either it's the end of the world or absolutely nothing is happening. And as always, the answer is probably somewhere in between. I've had a kind of weird emotional response, it feels like, where, if you're a young, healthy individual, you actually don't really have a great risk of dying. Your biggest risk is probably being a carrier for other people that you care about. but I don't think many people are cognizant of that. It's either like, oh, I'm not going to die, I don't care, or oh shit, I'm going to die, everything's about me, like fuck everyone else. And it's both like, because the steps. So actually I'm kind of excited about this, which sounds weird to say, but what I mean by this is, look, on the Richter scale of everything that could go wrong of existential crisis, this is probably like a 3 or a 4, if we're being totally honest. It's not nothing, but like you still have electricity and you still have food, and like that's probably not going to go away. So it's not full out like zombie apocalypse level. And so I'm excited because this is like the process of any kind of spiritual work, is bringing up the unconscious, habitual, automatic stuff for you to like look at like very clearly in front of you and say, ooh, is this how I like this? Do I actually like that, our medical systems can't handle any influx? Do I like that every individual at the slightest like push against us just falls to our knees and freaks out and becomes hyper individual and will buy stock of grocery stores when our neighbors could also use those things? Like it's a huge like social case study. And actually when we get through this, because again, humans are the most resilient creatures ever to exist, like when we get through this, there's going to be a lot of good that comes from it. We're going to look deeply at like emergency medical response. We're going to look deeply at the just-in-time production systems of like the world economic thing. Like we're going to look at ourselves a lot too. And so it's going to be a bumpy road, but there's going to be a lot of good, I feel, that comes out of this. And that drives this excitement and curiosity in me. Because it's also interesting to see, like, you have both spoken beautifully about this group in the middle who's able to kind of hold center, but that group is very, very small, it seems. And it's very interesting to see where people land on this, whether they're completely head in the sand about it, nothing is happening, or they're way too overblown. It's just a really strong mirror to see where everyone's at and where we're at collectively.
The thing that comes up for me as well with the coronavirus is it really taps into almost like a mythological fear that we have. What this reminds me of is very much like Game of Thrones, like the White Walkers from Game of Thrones. You have this army that can't be killed. Like that's what it is, right? So we have this virus, we don't have the tools to kill it, and it's coming. Bit by bit, it's creeping from this unknown land, and it's coming into our towns, and it's taking our people, and the numbers are being reported on the news, and it is very kind of creepy, like I'm just hearing now that in my small village in Wales, like 3 more people have been diagnosed. And it's like tapping into that kind of mythological fear, like the storyline that there's this deadly force, this invisible force that you can't run away from, you can't hide from, and you can't fight it, and it's like seeping into our towns, and it is kind of creepy. I think that's really what we're responding to, many of us, much more than the actual data. Like the data is just data. It's like I was listening to a podcast on the Sam Harris Making Sense podcast, by a John Hopkins researcher, Amesh Adalja, and he said that if you look at the testing that's been done on the coronavirus, it's actually been pretty terrible. But the one place that has done really good testing is South Korea, because they've put a lot of resources into testing. And if we look at the tests there, we see that the overall fatality rate is 0.6%. And he thinks that worst case scenario, the fatality rate of coronavirus is 0.6%, which is a lot lower than the 2, 3, or 4% that many online sources have put out. And again, people don't understand how to test properly, right? So we just see a number, we see an official website, we think, oh, this must be the gold standard of the data, but it's not actually the case. Testing is difficult, collecting data is difficult. So if there's a 0.6% chance of, across all demographics overall of dying from this virus, that means that if you contract it, it's like someone coming up to you saying, I'm awfully sorry. There's a 99.4% chance you'll survive this. And it's like literally that's the opposite frame. It's like you're almost, if I said to you, I'm 99.4% sure that this is a good decision, you probably bet everything you have on that number. But yet, because someone comes along with the 0.6 or the 1 or 2%, you're like, oh, it's magnified, and there's an innate desire to catastrophize, as you were saying, Mike, even among smart and wise people, because it is kind of scary, right? Like, it is kind of scary that 1 minute I was happy, and now I have to think that there's a 0.5% chance that I could die. That is kind of scary, even though there are those invisible risks every single day of your life across whatever you do, but yeah, what does the fear say to you, the way that people are reacting in small villages and towns?
Yeah, and one piece it's so interesting, because this is it's just such interesting territory that we're in right now, like this particular moment in time. How it's really, for a long time, I know all of us have been connected to the idea of a lot of our infrastructure here isn't really it's all kind of rickety around the edges and can't really sustain major blows. And from our education system to the way we're treating the environment, to, you could go down the line of the things you might want to put into the list of the things that characterize the meta crisis. But the way that this is showing up and really localizing, it's causing people to really, it's like landing on the ground, at their feet. It's not something that they're just watching in the news or reading, and I think that's interesting how confrontational this thing is. And like you say, Eric, it's not, it's not a nuclear holocaust level crisis. Could it get, there are pathways in which it could get there to something that is really terrible if the supply chains start getting dramatically disrupted and all of these kinds of things. So the word excited, to me, that feels a little bit too buoyant. There are definitely things that I'm intrigued by how this will unfold, and to see what opportunities will be given to learn. I do feel somewhat pessimistic that human beings will take the opportunity that is presented to actually learn and to grow from this process, given that we can already see the way that people are responding. I could just see a lot of blame and just further perpetuation of a lot of the things we're already seeing. My hope is that people do seize the opportunity, and one of the things related, it's just we're really in a liminal moment. We don't know, and all of these numbers and things we want to cling to help provide a sense of just understanding of what's really going on, which is good to sort of grab hold of those things. But even with the 0.6% number, John, that number changes dramatically if the medical infrastructure gets overwhelmed. And if people hold onto that number and think, well, I don't really need to worry about it, and that increases the spread of the transmission rate, then suddenly that number could be much higher. So it's really interesting, because we're in there's a component of this that is very psychological, and trying to parse the information and really understand what's going on, but I do like your calling forward of this sort of mythological sense. I do feel that, and I'm really interested to see what can happen when people begin to reflect on. And the optimistic part of me is that, say that a whole bunch of social distancing happens, or life really grinds to a halt for a little while, people then can return. When we do begin to kind of move forward from this, return with greater appreciation for things they once took for granted. I see that as a real opportunity for, I get to be around my family again. I get to go to these events. I get to just not really worry about hugging people. All those kinds of things, I think, could be really generative. But we'll see. We'll see what people do with the opportunity.
Yeah, this is bringing up something for me, which is, this is a practice round of when order descends into chaos, right? The dragon of chaos is now emerging and showing up, and so many of the people in this space always come with, oh well, I wanna help the world, right? I want to be a hero. Like, what can I do, right? And we always look for this over the top epic answer to that question, right? Like, yeah, go slay the dragon. Well, if you want to be a hero, just don't fall apart when shit gets real. Like, just don't fall apart. Like, it's again, I use this like analogy of the mirror a lot, because it's like, look, all people are being asked to do is basically like take care of your immune system and socially isolate a little bit. Like, that's kind of the reality of what we're being asked to do for like able-bodied people. And the amount of disruption that is causing, both on a personal and collective level, is astounding. Like, that really shouldn't be too much to ask. And if you do have a little bit more capacity, like, be emotionally available for your friends and family, like, help see if there's something you can do with your community. Like, if you want to be the hero, like, take the smallest steps that are available in front of you. Don't make the problem worse. Take the small steps that have been recommended. See if you can be an asset outside of that. And then as the dust settles, like, see if you can lead a charge to say, what did we learn here and how can we adapt around this? Like it doesn't take a lot to be the hero in the situation, and yet it seems to be too much to ask for many people. And it's like, yeah, so what happens if something comes along in a couple years where the food stops showing up in the grocery stores? What happens when your electricity goes off? Like, that is when shit gets real. And that's why this is like, it's a test. It's a practice round. This is like the dojo, because this is real. Like, don't take this isn't a joke, but it could be far worse. And so if you want to see like your muster and see the internal strength that you have, like, put it to work here. It's an opportunity. We're being like summoned to rise up and meet this, and a lot of us are either running away or just freaking out, which arguably doesn't push the situation forward a lot.
Yeah, I love that. If you want to be the hero, take the small steps. The heroic thing to do sometimes is to kind of take a back seat, right? To take a step back and not to be the one in the limelight doing the heroic, quote unquote, heroic things. That's a really important message. On the 0.6% fatality rate, Mike, I think you raised a good point that you could take that and then think, oh, there's nothing to worry about, and then act recklessly and put a lot of strain on the system because you're the one spreading the virus. I think my perspective on this is that here's a really useful frame of mind that I've been cultivating. It's like, individually, I don't have to worry about my health. 30 years old, I'm fit, I'm active, I take care of myself, I have no underlying health conditions. However, I have a duty and a responsibility for people more vulnerable, and it's on me to look after them. And I can look after them by just taking the steps that have been recommended, like self-isolating, or not self-isolating necessarily at this stage, but just avoiding unnecessary public spaces, keeping myself to myself a bit more, just being mindful of how I'm operating within the system. And the other thing as well is, remember, just because you don't die of something, it doesn't mean it doesn't cause massive issues. Like, if your entire house, you live with a few people, get sick at the same time, and you have like a temperature, and you're not sleeping, you're not eating properly, that causes issues. Maybe you've got a baby to look after, right? So you could be sick for a week, and it could cause, like, who's going to look after my son if I'm really ill? It can cause major difficulties too. So yes, we want to try and prevent getting this ourselves, number one, and also spreading it. So those are two obvious things that we can keep in mind. And Eric, you said, like, on the scale of things that could go wrong, this might be a 3 or 4. I would say, like, this might be, like, to me, more like a 0.1 out of 10 of the things that could go wrong. Because in that podcast that I was talking to you about, he said there are some avian viruses that have a fatality rate of 60%. And if those start jumping around in human beings and spreading really quickly, and we're struggling at the moment with a 0.6% fatality rate virus, like there's no way we're going to be able to cope with that. That would be like, that's 100 times more deadly than this. You can see like the world is starting to crumble, and it's only just beginning. So yeah, there's a lot to be afraid of. And this is, I like that I know when you said you're excited about this, I know you don't mean about the potential suffering, but I mean, this could be like a warning from nature. Step it up, get the protocols in place. Something a lot worse could happen, and you better be ready for it. And in terms I'd like to switch now to like, what can we actually do, like on an individual basis, and get into the nitty-gritty of that. And what I find fascinating about this current situation is that a lot of the things that we should be doing are things we should be doing anyway. That's the funny part of it. Like, I've seen statistics like only 30% of people actually wash their hands after using the restroom, and only 5% of people wash their hands for like 20 seconds or more. So like, why, like, we should be washing our hands anyway. Like, this is a good skill to cultivate, washing our hands with soap and water a few times a day when we touch unhygienic, dirty surfaces. I mean, like, that's a good habit anyway. Having a good immune system. So like, that means being fit, being active, getting a good night's sleep. Like, wow, sleeping 8 hours a night might be one of the best things you can do for your health over the next year. That's the way it's always been since you were born. Like, getting a good night's sleep, it's always going to be in your best interest. Having a diet that's not like overly processed. Getting some supplements like vitamin D if you don't live in a place with a lot of sun. So yeah, just looking after yourself and looking after your health is something you should be doing anyway. And I hope that this situation is highlighting that even more so to you now.
Yeah. One thing that jumped to mind to me, some of the things you were saying, John, that I think is worthwhile, and you said this word duty. Mm-hmm. And I really liked your invocation of that word, because part of what this is doing is revealing something that is often invisible, and just really turning up the volume on it and making it so dramatically visible. Like we could be the single node that sets off a cascade of fatality if we're not careful. If we're that one person who's asymptomatic and walks into some crowded place and spreads it all around, we might not even know that we've done it, but we have that power to create such devastation. And that has always been true. It's just not something people usually sit with or contend with. We tend to downplay our own significance in the world and the things and why the actions that we take matter. And we're seeing now that these actions, these choices that we make actually do matter, and it can be life or death. And so even like if you think about from the perspective of walking past someone who is visibly who is crying, and if you decided to stop that person and just ask them, hey, is everything okay? Do you need someone to talk to? Which would be a courageous thing to do. Not many people would do that. A lot of people just want to stay in their lane. But that choice could be the difference between that person surviving or not. Because that person might be suicidal or things like that. Small things that we do can set off these chain reactions. And it's really like, wow, revering our own significance, our own participation in the system. We feel we're in these bodies and encapsulated, but the effects of our choices extend far beyond them. And to really recognize that and then begin to act and conduct ourselves from that place of recognition is worthy to consider. And there's a lot that we can do in this time that goes beyond simply spreading or reducing the spread of the disease. We can reduce the spread of fear and panic through the emotional work that we've done in our lives by learning and meeting fear and not having run from it in the past, we can bring the courage and confidence of those experiences and be a nurturing voice, a voice of reason in the face of calamity. And I don't know about you guys, but that's the kind of person that I want to be. In the face of crisis, I want to be someone, like you said, Eric, who doesn't crumble, who doesn't fall apart, someone who can actually be relied on. You know, that to me is an honorable and noble pursuit. And we all are in the process of being given that opportunity. You know, can I show up in that way? And the other piece that could be really powerful about this, we have, I mean, it depends on where you are in the world, but certainly in the West, culture around death is extremely death phobic. And there's going to be a lot of loss. And it's very sad that that is going to happen. And there will be a lot of grief. And it will be interesting given how it all happens. It could happen so quickly, you know, there could be a lot of people who die. And I'm not saying this to be alarmist, but even in a small community, say 100 people die, like all within the same time frame. That's a lot. And it's hard to grieve that. And so it's an opportunity for us to learn how to come together and support each other through the experience of loss, because that is not something that's going to go away. It's always been here, lurking in the corners. We're all going to experience deep and profound loss as we continue living. And that is something to learn how to negotiate and navigate through. And we might be in the process of a wave of that. And I just hope that whether you lose someone or you're able to really go through the process of honoring that loss, and if someone else loses someone that is close to you, that you can help steward them through the pain that they're going through. So those are some pieces that felt relevant in this context, but also will always be relevant in some ways. They're kind of universally relevant. And wanted to speak to those.
Yeah, these are amazing. The big one for me is, if anything, don't make things worse. Like, seriously. Like, if you feel compelled to do something and it's actually a net negative, like, you were better off not doing it in the first place. There would be a better outcome in that case. And again, the things that we are being asked to do at this time are not overwhelming. Take care of yourself. Don't go to unnecessary things in public. That is really not too much to ask. And so if you can't do anything else, do those. We have this joke amongst the team of remember your training. And, you know, that just meaning, like, if you meditate, if you do ceremony, all this personal growth and development work, like, what are you actually doing it for? Honestly, this is a great way to prove the results of the work that you've done, which is, yes, can you be a foundational pillar for people? Like, take care of your own stuff, increase your capacity so that you can show up for others. And Mike is touching on an incredibly important point, which is like the second order effects of the emotional fallout of this is going to be huge. It's going to have a long tail too, like widespread depression, increased anxiety, just a lot of family dynamics messing up. And it's like, can you hold space for those people? Can you show up for them? Can you be compassionate? Again, I spoke a little bit earlier about this hero thing, and like, look, if you want to be the hero, do these really small things. They're not difficult. They're not arduous. Just show up and do them. And that is like the thing. Don't make it worse. Show up like how you can for people. And like, if everyone was able to do that and took this seriously and didn't stoke the fear, like, this would go a lot smoother.
Yeah, I love that. And I want to bring it back into this thing I've been thinking about statistics. You know, I don't understand statistics very well. Like, statistics is quite a deep subject. You know, you can study just statistics alone for many years before you can call yourself an expert on how statistics work. But what I do know is is that I don't know statistics very well, and if I don't know statistics very well, there's a good likelihood most people don't understand statistics very well. So one thing that I've been thinking about is this idea of old people being vulnerable to this coronavirus. And while that is true, it is still true that the overwhelming majority of old people who get, or elderly people who get this virus, will survive. And I think we're for some reason we're kind of like thinking it's all doom and gloom. But say there's a 15% fatality rate for 80 plus year old citizens. That still means like you're gonna have to, you're gonna have to catch the coronavirus like 8 to 10 times before it would kill you. Like those are pretty good odds, like a 1 out of 10 chance. Now we've become kind of privileged, like if you look through human history, like the average age in like the Paleolithic time was what, like late 20s or something. Like you could die from having a cavity in your teeth. Like you go back a couple of 100 years and like life was constant. Like there were all these kind of strange viruses that could just kill you or paralyze you, and that was just something we accepted as part of life. Now there's this virus that, for 80 plus year olds gives you a 1 in 10 chance of dying. It's while it should be taken seriously, let's keep the hope, keep the optimism that is still very low, actually, in the grand scheme of things. And most old people, when you're dealing with large numbers, we tend to focus in on the bad cases, but most old people who get this will actually be completely fine and will survive and strive forward. And yeah, like this whole situation, like you were saying, Mike, is bringing up a lot of this death phobic stuff in our societies, where it's like, oh, the Grim Reaper is coming, like the same as the mythological fear of the White Walkers coming for us. And for me, at least, it's making me question, like, do I need to be really afraid of dying? It is a part of life at the end of the day, and this is reminding me that, yeah, like death is very natural, death is very real. I am a biological creature. One day I will perish. This is not bad. This is natural. This is the same as being born. It's neither good nor bad. It's just is part of life. So this is a good opportunity to try and become at ease with the fact that everything is changing. There's always a beginning. There's always an end. And you don't need to be afraid of it. You can just embrace it. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. It's part of life. There's a beginning, there's an end. Imagine your favorite film playing for like eternity without an ending. It would very soon become like the worst film, not the best film. It's nice to have an ending, to have a climax to things. That's what gives things meaning. I want to circle back as well to the practical steps that we can take. I mentioned health as being one of them, so I'll just recap on some of the things I'm doing, and I'd like to hear what you guys are doing as well to take care of yourself. So I'm really trying to get my sleep good at the moment, and this is something that I should be doing anyway, but now again this is an opportunity for me to knuckle down on this. So trying to get consistent sleeping and waking times, trying to get my 8 hours in, trying to do some resistance training, like sort of lifting weights. It doesn't matter if you just got a few dumbbells at home or you do some push-ups. There are benefits to resistance training that you don't get from cardiovascular training, and there are also benefits from cardiovascular training that you don't get from weightlifting. So trying to do a little bit of both, so some push-ups and some jogging or skipping rope. This keeps your lungs, your heart, everything in check, and you just feel good. I'm supplementing with vitamin D. I think that's a big one. That's one of the major deficiencies in the Western world, because that you get that vitamin from sunlight. And we honestly don't know if most people are deficient in vitamin D, and we honestly don't really know what impact this virus is having, or would have if someone had enough vitamin D in their system. I don't know, but I mean, I know that vitamin D affects over 1,000 functions in the body, and I definitely want to keep taking it, whether this virus is here or not. Also supplementing with garlic and vitamin K. You can look into this on examine.com, HighExamine.com is a really good website for unbiased supplement information. And also, I think this ties back in is having a purpose that's bigger than myself. So I don't want my purpose in life to be about like, I must stay healthy and I must not get this virus and I must survive. Actually, my purpose can be me sharing with other people that I want them to be healthy. So encouraging my family to get enough sleep, helping out a bit more around the house so they have less stress. And I would encourage everyone to do the same thing, like take care of yourself and also encourage other people. Use this opportunity to try and help other people be as healthy as they can be. Maybe cook a healthy meal for them, or just sort of like take off some of the chores so they can get a good night's sleep. And then when it comes to hygiene, again, it's very simple, like wash your hands for 20 seconds with soap and water. Try not to touch surfaces that hundreds and thousands of other people have touched. You could buy some disposable gloves, or you could just use a tissue. It's like super simple, like just the obvious stuff. Don't touch surfaces that many, many, many other people have touched. And in terms of like 30-day challenges, I think that one really good challenge that you can start implementing now is like, do not touch your face. Like, do not touch your face, like under any circumstances with your hands, unless you've just washed your hands. You'd be surprised how often you actually touch your facial hair or your nose or your eyebrows or your hair. And remember, if you don't touch your face, there's the only other way you can really contract coronavirus, as far as we know, is through breathing it, through direct contact with someone who's infected with it. So they sneeze on you or cough on you, or you're just very close to them for a number of minutes. But otherwise, you're going to be getting it from surfaces, and if you don't touch your face and you wash your hands, then you really are protecting yourself quite well. So that's just something to keep in mind. Good hand hygiene. I know it's repeated a lot in the media, but just don't touch your face, and be careful what surfaces you touch. And do you guys have anything to add on to those?
I would contribute, if you're able, and you can do so in a way that there aren't a ton of other people around. I'm fortunate enough to be in Boulder, where there's a lot of nature, a lot of space. I can't pull up the exact pieces of research, but having a connection to nature, to the physical world, is psychologically healing, but I wouldn't be surprised if it didn't improve our immune systems. And so I read someone mentioning, you might be disconnected from a lot of social interactions, but there is a way you can form a deep connection with these other living creatures, to stand by a tree or just to see the birds flying about, and just maintain your connection to the world in some sense. Don't be, the social distancing can feel like alienation or isolation, and there's a way you can still feel the this important connectedness. That's one that jumps to mind. And I like the piece that you mentioned, John, about the purpose piece. There's a role that we get to play here, and this experience might not be the month of March that we were anticipating, and we've got events are getting canceled and things are in disarray. But this is affording us an opportunity to show up, like you were saying, Eric. Remember your training. Who are the people we can call? So that's another piece. Remaining connected to family and friends, calling them, checking in on how they're doing. Are they panicking? Are they worrying? What information can you share with them? Another thing I would suggest is it's probably not a good idea to get involved in arguments online with people who have a different opinion than you. You're not going to persuade them. You're very likely not going to persuade them. You could probably put that energy into supporting people who are already in some way on the same wavelength. So those things really jump out at me as things that you can be doing. And ironically, that advice is good even outside of pandemic conditions. Arguing with people online, usually not a good idea. Spending time in nature is really a good idea, and calling up your friends and family and checking in on how they're doing and supporting them if you can. These are all great things. So this could help. There, as much as there's real tragedy and difficulty already here in some places and on the horizon, there are beautiful opportunities to meet people in places that you may have never had a chance to meet them in. You know, a friend or family who will feel very scared, or they feel intensity. You could be there with them. There's ways that relationships can grow closer through the process of an unfolding tragedy. That doesn't mean I wish for tragedy, but there are ways we can see that anything that happens has some generative potential to it. Post-traumatic growth is a thing. People get impacted by the world and then become better for it. It doesn't always happen, but it can if we're willing to choose into things and take the opportunity in stride. So that's what I'd say. And I want to circle back real briefly to touch on something, because this, although it might introduce a spike of uncertainty, even if there's 1 in 10 chance, which is a little bit better than Russian roulette odds. I wouldn't really hand my grandmother a revolver, but the one thing that we aren't sure about, because this is novel, is what the effects are. Like we want to assume that we could just heal from this, and like we would a cold or a flu, and we'd be fine. But we don't know if there are long-term effects. We don't know if there will be lung scarring, if there will be neurological damage in some way. We don't know how this could diminish quality of life, even if a person survives and isn't in the sort of fatality column. So that's something that is important to remember, is we're not really sure what this means, if someone does heal from it. Hopefully you can heal and you're just back to normal, you're functioning again. But we're the sort of we can't know that right now because this is novel. So that's just something. That's another reason to just do these things. Be mindful. Don't freak out, but be mindful.
Yeah, these are great. Honestly, my list is pretty simple. Cold showers or ice baths, great for immunity. Social distancing, just actually bringing that up. Like we all work remotely. I think we're relatively settled into that. But again, if you have to go into the office, this is a great way to be the hero. Like pioneer the remote work thing for your company. Like get people out of the office. Again, very, very easy, very straightforward. Intermittent fasting can help your immune system as well, like a 16-8 protocol or an 18-6. Again, relatively simple. And the last thing is like regulate your nervous system. Like anger, anxiety, depression, these things all actually lower your immunity, right? So if you're feeling into this and you're getting worked up by it, find a way to dump that, right? You can do breath work, you can do yoga, like continue your own self-care routine, because that in turn strengthens the whole thing, increases your capacity to go back out. But it's very easy to get worked up in this, and if you have been getting worked up, cool, acknowledge that, but make sure you have the space as well to dump that and actually calm your nervous system back down.
And I want to add the note here that none of us are medical doctors. You could do all of these things, you still might get coronavirus. None of this stuff is a cure or will like create an invincible wall around you. And if you have a stronger immune system and you do get the virus, that's good, because you're going to be able to better defend it, and it'll keep you a little bit more protected from catching other illnesses, which would compound the effects and make it harder for you to recover. So that's important. That's important to note. And these things, again, are valuable practices just in general. So say you start doing these things and this gives you the perfect incentive to do it, and this thing blows over, and there is some devastation, but we learn a lot and we grow from it. And now you've installed a few really powerful habits into your life, and you go about your day feeling better. That's another thing. If you start doing some of these things, like Eric's saying, you're regulating your nervous system, you're getting these cold showers, you're feeling better, so you have greater clarity, you can make better choices. That helps everybody if you're making better choices. So I just raise that as a possibility. This could be an opportunity where you actually start to feel better because you're doing things that take care of you. And we're in a moment of disruption where, one of the ways that we can change our behavior is through an environmental transformation. And usually that happens when you move or you have like a new swirl of friends come into your life. But now we're all subject to an environmental transformation because of the ways that people are behaving differently at scale and the ways that this is affecting events and stuff. We're all in the ground that we're standing on is a bit different from the ground we were in a week ago, 2 weeks ago. So there's a ripe for behavior modification. This is the time to feel that change and to actually make it. So I just add that.
Yeah, that's a very important thing to add, that we are not medically qualified by any stretch coronavirus experts, and we encourage you all to follow the recommendations of your government. I think the message that we are kind of elaborating on is that we know that this virus spreads, and we want to try and contain that. So I mean, the simplest advice is why would we want to be in large gatherings if we don't need to be? That's quite an obvious suggestion that I find it difficult to imagine anyone would disagree with. And then, we want to try and optimize our health, which we should be doing anyway, because we know that, if generally speaking, the healthier we are, the easier we can recover from illness and injury. So we're just sharing our sort of preferred methods for going about those two aims. But what I want to switch to now is that I had this funny thought earlier, and it was something like, if I studied my exams in school as much as I'd studied coronavirus, I would have passed everything with flying colors. And it's this idea that everyone's now becoming this expert on coronavirus, right? It's almost kind of slightly comical how literally everyone's got an opinion on it, and everyone has become an expert on this topic in the last week or two. And I say that it's comical because we know that, of course, you can't become an expert on infectious diseases in a week or two. That's kind of impossible. But what I'm seeing is a lot of people are now taking this serious thing that's happening and making almost like a hobby out of it. And the hobby is consuming them. They're researching it and checking the news, and it's become something that takes up multiple hours of their day. And what I want to get to is a point where it's showering, brushing my teeth, preparing my meals. These are things that I do, but I don't unnecessarily waste more time on them than I need to. I don't get anxious about them. Now, there are certain protocols that are best practices for coronavirus that we should follow, but beyond that, I think the most important thing is that we try to have fun, try to live a good life, try to make the most of everything else. So yeah, I just want to make a point of we should really get clear on what we can do to help the situation, to help ourselves, and providing we've ticked those boxes on a daily basis, let's try and live our life. Let's try to put our lives on hold as little as possible. So let's make time for play. Let's have fun. Let's make time for study. Let's connect with people. If you do feel like you want to stay in a bit more, how many people can you call or can you FaceTime? How can you have as much fun as possible in your house, more fun than you've ever had? Maybe you can do some painting or tidy up your study. There's so many things, so many projects that you've been putting off. Now is the perfect opportunity to do them. So I'd like to ask Mike and Eric, after, beyond the things that you're doing to keep yourself and other people safe, what are you doing for fun? What are you looking forward to? What is your focus, and What are you optimistic about right now?
It's funny you bring this up, John, because just the other day I was thinking about how, if, say, people are doing less socializing, not going out to events and things like that, I had the sense that, man, this is a great opportunity for people to make art, whatever their specific flavor of that is. Maybe if they've never even considered themselves an artist, a good way to channel some of the feelings you might be having is into a piece of writing, or paint something, draw something. Our creating of art can be incredibly therapeutic for ourselves and others. And this will be especially true if you end up losing someone. And I think the practice of tribute is one of the best things you can do to support yourself in grieving a loss. And the idea of tribute is creating a piece of art that carries with it an embedded recognition of the meaning that thing carried for you, and it's a saying goodbye to it in the process of immortalizing it in some work, some piece. And so for me, I've got just some things that I want to write that I feel excited about. I've got some books that I'm drawing inspiration from sitting right here next to me on the desk, and those pieces feel really exciting. So that's the piece that I'll speak to, is that's what feels most alive in the moment.
Yeah, I have to say this whole situation has been a little weird for me because my life hasn't changed at all. So again, I've worked remotely for half a decade now, so I'm often by myself. I'm constantly quite socially isolated. I don't go out a lot. I mostly just read and write, and that was like a chosen lifestyle, so there's nothing bad about it. But again, the two things I said were like social distancing and basic healthcare. It's like, okay, yeah, I took care of myself normally, and I'm relatively socially distant. So it's been strange because, the digital world is lighting up around me, and there's so much going on, and yet I'm still just chopping wood and carrying water just like any other day. So that hasn't changed a lot. Again, I started this whole conversation off, and maybe the wording was a little weird, but part of what I'm excited about is witnessing this, is watching how we as a collective are making sense of things. How quickly are we iterating? Like, can we actually take action? How are people responding? Because this is now the work that I do for both High Existence and our retreats, is like, how do we go through crisis? How do we deal with collective and individual trauma? Like, what comes next? How can digital tools help us with this? So I'm actually just watching this unfold in front of me as a large part of my day. And then, we've got a fun initiative coming up that I now have ample time to do, which is we're starting to get into video a lot more. And so I've really been digging into putting together some of those for our profiles, starting to film some of myself. And again, I'm inside, I've got the time. I'm in Toronto, Canada, and we're kind of starting to bloom into spring, so I'm cleaning out a bunch of my stuff. There's this sense of a renewal through all of this. I don't know if anyone saw the pictures, but after the Australian bushfires at the beginning of this year, plant matter had already started to grow, right? There's this resiliency to life and this beauty that comes through it, and it actually can be necessary. It again is this poke where we will become more resilient because of this. And so just witnessing and being able to create stuff around that, like this conversation even, is an example of the kind of serious play that we do. And so yeah, that's kind of what's on the menu for the foreseeable future right now.
Beautiful. I love the poke to become more resilient. When I did the research for the Stoic Quest, I read a lot of Seneca, the Stoic philosopher Seneca, and someone asked him in one of his dialogues, how is it that bad things happen to good people? It's a good question. If there is a God, how is it that the bad things happen to good people? And his whole frame is worth reading in Seneca's dialogues and essays. His whole frame was that God does like the same way that we go to the movie theater to watch our favorite protagonists in action. We don't want everything to go easy for them. We like them to experience conflict and to overcome it. And God actually, for the most important and admirable and heroic people, he likes to see them overcome challenge. That was Seneca's perspective. So if there are things that are difficult in your life, don't necessarily think that you're alone and that nobody cares for you. Maybe it is the case that something much more abstract and intelligent than you can even fathom is actually enjoying the show and seeing how well you show up to it. That's just an interesting thought for you to play around with. And then the other thing as well with the Stoics is that they didn't really take the externals that seriously, because the externals will always be subject to fortune and luck. Like we can't control what other virus comes around the corner. So are we going to live our whole precious life waiting in anxiety for the next thing? Instead, the Stoics focused a lot more on intention and thought, the person that you are. And from this perspective, if you show up with good character, then nothing bad actually can happen to you, because the only bad thing that can happen is that you lose your good character. And if you start viewing life from this perspective, then you are innately invincible from the get-go. So yeah.
Yeah, I love the piece you just shared there, John. I've thought about this as well. This idea that, how could a loving God let bad things happen to good people? And I think about particularly the loss, when that's like a real poignant bad thing. And it's like, what is the mercy in tragedy? And I've thought about it, and if someone dies, you lose them, but you don't lose the love. And if you can imagine like a concentration of energy is falling on that person, there's this feedback loop that's happening as you're in relationship to them. The love that is shared, this connectivity that you feel, the experiences that you have. And then and that's like this stored up, like this almost like in between the two of you, there is this dam of love that is building over time. And when there's the loss happens, whether that person leaves your life or they pass away, there's this flooding out that transpires. This just like a wave of this explosion, because now the other side of the dam isn't there, and that is the grieving process. And it can be very painful because of the depth of the care that was there, but really actively approached and earnestly undertaken, that process of grief can mean that love you shared with that person now spreads evenly out over the world before you, where the love that you had for them is now transposed into life itself. This is because as we really reckon with loss as a fact of life, we can begin to experience the preciousness of things, that they are not promised, and that we have it now is a gift to be received, not an expectation to be fulfilled. And from that place, we can actually experience appreciation for a lot of things we have taken for granted before. And that means in a single loss, we can gain the world in a way.
Yeah, I love this. And this is my favorite frame right now, which is like, where's the opportunity here? Like, what are you being called to do? What is being asked of you? And like, to your point, John, like, we love movies where the hero undergoes adversity and overcomes it and rises up into their power. And similarly, we love deep storyline role-playing games where you have to go around and develop your character and overcome obstacles and level up. And like, look, if you were, this is probably my favorite frame right now. Like, if you were a god and you wanted to play a game with yourself, what would it look like? It would look like this. Like, you're a small person who feels like you can't do a lot. You're in a world in flux, undergoing a pandemic. What are you going to do? Like, what a game to play. Like, what an opportunity to rise up and like be that hero of that game and actually be like, what am I going to do? What actions are available to me? Who can I talk to? Where can I go from here? What's the most effective thing? And it's like, yeah, you can always take these things as beneficial challenges. Like, sure, this is difficult. Your life is going to be difficult. This is just a different flavor. This is like a boss mode. And it's like, okay, like, let's get to work.
Yeah, that's such a good frame. And you shared with me the Alan Watts dream before, Eric, about, like, if you were this god who could experience anything, eventually you chose to, eventually you would get bored. And it's also, I think Jordan Peterson said about Dostoevsky that he said that if you give a person a world without any problems, very soon they'd be smashing it up with a hammer so that they could have something to solve. And we are problem solvers. We are people who need some challenge, otherwise we get soft. And this is life. This is happening. You are living in the same way that you read a history book and you're like, whoa, I can't believe what those guys went through. We are those guys now. You are a human being. The world is interesting and ever changing. This is the time to show what you're made of. And this is only just one moment in time. When we get through this, there's going to be other challenges. Everything is training. So I think we've covered a lot here, and I don't want to overwhelm our listeners. We are going to be doing these group conversations much more frequently now. I hope that you've really enjoyed hanging out with us and listening in on some of these discussions, these very real discussions, where honestly we feel like we can talk about anything openly, and we'd like you to have these kinds of discussions with your friends as well. And if you don't, then perhaps you can initiate that. Or get in touch with us, read our articles, comment on our posts. We're always up for discussing things. We have a community that's soon to be released. The date at the moment, I think we should mention as well, is the 12th of March. That's the date that we're speaking right now. But do you have anything to add at the moment, guys?
I would just say, some of these things, these last few pieces that are being touched on, kind of harken back to this idea of mythology and our sense of, personal mythology. And it's easy to look at stories and then see how our life is like a story, but we have to remember that stories have emerged from life. Heroes existed before stories were written. We all already are those things. You exist in a nexus of time and space that is unique to you. The things that you have to do are only the things that you can do, specifically the specific things that you can do, and the people that are around you and where you are. And so I just say that to elevate your significance. There's a lot of people in this world, but the things that you do, the choices you make, the words that you speak, they matter. And they matter more than you know. And so I just would like to leave you with that.
Yeah, a lot of people find their way to us because they're trying to answer the question, like, what does a good person do? And although that question is difficult to answer, one option might be dependable when things go wrong. And this is your chance to do that. Like, rise up, practice your sovereignty. Like, be a rock for people. Don't make things worse. Like, yeah, like ask yourself the question, like, what if this is happening for me? What am I going to do? Like, what is the lesson here? How do I show up? And just run with it. Like, to Mike's point was beautiful. Like, like you're the hero you've been waiting for. No one's coming to save you. You can come save everyone. You're at the center of the universe. Go be awesome.
Yeah, I love that. I just want to wrap up with one concept that I know you guys are familiar with as well, and I think this is highly relevant, and it's the Stockdale paradox. So James Stockdale was a prisoner of war camp in a Vietnam camp, and he was a big fan of Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher, and he had this paradoxical mindset when he was in this prisoner of war camp, where he was almost like scientifically hyper realistic about the things that could go wrong and the adversity that he faced. At the same time, he had faith, he had optimism, he had hope that things would work out. And this Stockdale paradox, they call it, you can also call it realistic optimism. It's this willingness to look at the hard truths of the situation, but also not becoming corrupted by them and becoming too pessimistic or resentful or anxious or afraid. Always having some hope that things will prevail. And maybe you don't know how, or maybe they won't prevail in the way that you want or think they will, but things will work out in some way. So yeah, I'd like to just sort of encourage you to look at the facts, do the research, prepare yourself, but make jokes with your friends and talk about things you're going to be doing, things you're looking forward to in the future, and never lose faith that things will work out in the end. Thank you for listening to High Existence Podcast. The fact that you listened to this all the way through is such a gift. It means so much. If you could pass it on to a friend that you think might find it useful, that would also be amazing. If you want to leave a review or a rating, that would also go a long way to supporting the podcast and helping us continue to do these. So yeah, once again, thank you, and we will see you in the next episode.